Okay, welcome to another episode of Thoughts and Bolts. This is your host, Pedro Oliveria, and this is part 13 of our, AAWSAP LEAP series, the Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies 10-month report study. Again, this was a leaked document. It didn't go through FOIA, and it has a lot of goodies, and we like to study those goodies in the context of what else has been released um, surrounding the OSAP program by people affiliated with it directly or indirectly, because context is king. Today, I want to go over something called Project Forum. Now, what's really interesting is that Project Forum is not mentioned in Skinwalkers at the Pentagon or Initial Revelations. Those are the two books written by Jim Lukatsky and Colin Kelleher, the director and operations managers of OSAP. They don't mention Project Forum at all. And I don't know if that's because they wrote about it, but they didn't get through DOPSR, right? The Defense Office of Pre-Publication Security Review, right? I don't know, if they did write about it, but it didn't get through DOPSR, or they simply didn't write about it. It like the implant studies, right, or the rationale behind having the implant studies, it was never mentioned in either of those books, which is very interesting. Now, Project Forum, what was it? Project Forum was a program intended to raise the level of awareness of the importance of ET and the potential of disclosure in North America. Okay, so if you want to pause the video and just read this for yourself, you can do that. Um, Project Forum essentially was intended to be what you could call a slow rip disclosure. Okay. They were going to do this because they felt a need to influence the country in a way that would reverse the effects of decades of systematic debunking of the UFO topic. And in other videos, I've argued that this systematic debunking in some cases was actually done under the direction of the CIA. You should watch my old video on General Pope when my production values weren't as good. They're still not great. I'm working on it. But yeah, Project Forum was also going to focus on the state of California because they knew influencing the entire United States was overly ambitious, right? America is a very big country, and though everybody speaks English and almost everybody has a Christian background, um, and there aren't that many, how should I say? Well, let me just say, America is not homogeneous, right? America has a lot of different local cultures with people who have different attitudes about everything. And you can see that with the whole, red states versus blue state divide, right? So, they knew they couldn't influence the whole country, but they knew that there was one state that is probably the most important when trying to influence the whole country, and that's California, right? California is described as a bellwether state where trends and fashions are created, where thought leadership is considered at the forefront, right? So if you want to influence the entire country indirectly, win over California, okay? Because as California goes, so does the rest of the United States, for good or for bad. Um, Now, it's really interesting how they wanted to go about this, right? Project Forum was intended to have a multimedia approach that in order to expand the awareness in discussion forums, specifically in Central and Northern California. Okay, those were the targets, right? Central and Northern California. I mean, if you go back to the 60s, where a lot of the different new cultural trends started, right? Whether it be the hippie movement and music and all that stuff, it was coming from the Central Coast in Northern California, places like San Francisco, right? They wanted to hold like these debates in front of large audiences. And the central premise of these debates is that the existence of UAP and ET visitations are true. Now, what's really interesting here is that it shows that OSAP's uh, default theory, right? Their working model was an extraterrestrial model. I know nowadays in ufology, things like an interdimensional model or crypto terrestrials or, even time travelers. This is all very popular in the UFO world. The ET theory has kind of fallen into disuse. But it seems that with OSAP, that was the working model. And I haven't put it here, but there is a DIRD, uh, Defense Intelligence Reference Document, on improvements made to the Drake equation, which allow them to kind of guess the probability, find the probability of finding life in the galaxy, um, uh, in relation to that life's distance from Earth, right? So where in the Milky Way galaxy are we most likely to find life? Is it within our solar system? Is it 2 million light years away? They have a whole defense intelligence reference document dedicated to the Drake equation. So it seems that whether that was a working model or their leading theory, I have no idea, but that's really what they wanted to talk about with Project Forum. They wanted to have these UFO debates, and they wanted them to be moderated um, by celebrities, right? These were going to be intellectual debates, but they wanted celebrities to be involved. Okay. And they even had a list of celebrities who had a professed interest in the UAP topic that they might be willing to use. They wanted to use television promotion, newspaper print promotion, radio promotion, internet promotion, um, every form of media we have in order to raise awareness and reverse the stigma that has existed for the past 80 years. Okay. So, there were some criteria that they had for judging whether this California focused, celebrity leveraged, multimedia UFO education program was going to be successful. Um, and one of the criteria, right? One of the ways they thought they might be able to know whether this is successful or not is if the following happened, quote, if Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Study succeeds in calibrating the general public's attitudes to and interest in disclosure and the ET topic as a result of Project Forum, this will be a much more accurate calibration than the dozens of opinion polls on the topic, right? So the whole thing they wanted to do was switch public attitudes. Now, it's strange that, if you read this in a vacuum, you might find this strange, right? Why is a classified Pentagon UFO program, right? It's being administered through Bigelow Aerospace. Why is it trying to change public perception about this subject? Why is it trying to reduce the stigma? Why is it trying to change public attitudes about it? Through, again, focusing on America's bellwether state, its cultural hub, if you will, or it's, where the cultural avant-garde of America lives. Um, and why were they trying to leverage celebrities and all that sort of thing? But if you remember that the whole point of OSAP was to act as a catcher's mitt for alien technology, right? Recovered alien technology being stored by Lockheed Martin. Um, it seems that this was in some ways intended to be a passing of the guard, right? Lockheed did what it could do or did not do what it wanted to do with this material. And now it was going to a new group of people. And rather than have this intense secrecy that centered on gaslighting the American public, it seems that they were going to have some kind of secrecy that also allowed for uh, the knowledge derived from the UFO phenomenon and studying it to leak into the culture so that perhaps there's just a little less secrecy, right? So if you look at David Grush, one thing he's argued is that, obviously not everything should be made public, right? You have to have some state secrets for national security reasons. Jim Lukatsky has said the same thing. National security trumps all other considerations. Um, however, we have state secrets that aren't as uh, covetously guarded as the UFO secrets, right? For example, everybody knows the hydrogen bomb exists. Everybody knows atomic weapons exist, right? But we don't learn how to make them in school, right? So if you become a physics major in college, you're going to learn about, nuclear fission and nuclear fusion, and you're going to learn about the untapped powers of the atom, right? And how, people, you know, do engineering so as to use nuclear fission or nuclear fusion in order to power cities, but you're never going to learn how to make an atomic bomb, right? Because those are state secrets. And so it would appear, right? If you start from the foundation that yes, OSAP was all about, getting the Lockheed Martin alien technology and studying it. In that context, this program makes a lot more sense, right? They wanted to maintain UFO secrecy, but not at the point of gaslighting the public, because as others have argued since then, that's probably done more harm than good with regards to our ability to study and understand this non-human technology. Now, what happened to Project Forum, right? It didn't go anywhere. We've never heard about it, or I've never heard about it until I read this leaked document. Well, as in other things related to the OSAP program, Project Forum appears to have a descendant. It seems that this POSE project, Project Forum, was seed that was planted, and it was a seed that grew into full bloom 10 years later. And to understand how that happened, we have to go back in time to the year 2002. That's right. We have to go back to um, asking ourselves why in 2009 Boss knew Lockheed Martin had this stuff, right? Because again, this is the most secret of all secrets, right? Why did Harry Reid say he had heard for decades that Lockheed Martin had this stuff? Why did the Bigelow people, the OSAP people, believe Lockheed had this stuff? And why did they know to approach people like Jim Ryder in an attempt to have this tech transfer? Well, the answer to that question boils down to one man, I believe, and that's Eric W. Davis. And this is Eric W. Davis, right above my head. Okay. There's a document, UFO people know all about this, but if you're new to the subject, there's a document called the Wilson Davis Notes. And you can get your own copy of the Wilson Davis Notes by going to congress.gov because they were part of the official record of the 2022 UFO hearings that Congress had. So yeah, read the E.W. Davis notes for yourself because I'm not really going to go through them here. But basically, Eric W. Davis talked to Vice Admiral Tom Wilson, who was the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the same Defense Intelligence Agency, by the way, that would, have the OSAP program through Bigelow Aerospace, right? So apparently, Tom Davis found the program, right? As for those who don't know, Dr. Stephen Greer and Dr. Ed Mitchell. Ed Mitchell, one of the men who actually walked on the moon. I believe he's the 12th man to walk on the moon. Stephen Greer and Ed Mitchell had a meeting with Tom Wilson, and they had a document that supposedly had all the code names for the crushed UFO programs, right? The reverse engineering programs, and uh, where they were held. And Tom Wilson, having deep respect for Ed Mitchell, as we all should, because these guys walked on the moon, which is the most insane achievement ever in terms of exploration. Um, he followed up on it and he found the program. Now he confided this happened in the 90s, but he had confided this to Eric W. Davis, and Eric W. Davis, apparently having a didactic memory, was able to write down as much as he could of the conversation in these notes. These notes, there are only a handful of copies. One of them was in the papers of Ed Mitchell, and when Dr. Ed Mitchell passed away, one of his family members leaked them online in 2019. Now that's important. 2019. Put a pin in that date because it's going to be more important later. Now, going back to Project Forum, Tom DeLonge wrote a book called Secret Machines. Okay. And in the intro to Secret Machines, right? And this book is a historical fiction. Basically, it's about the UFO phenomenon and its relationship to the military industrial complex, right? Stephen Greer said before him, there are two kinds of UFOs, kinds humans make and the kinds non-humans make. Okay. And Secret Machines is about that essentially. What I want to focus on is the intro to Secret Machines written by Tom DeLonge and compare that to details in the Wilson Davis notes. Admiral Wilson, in the notes themselves, doesn't say he went to Lockheed. He simply said he went to the best aerospace contractor, right? The best aerospace contractor in the 90s, or at least in early 2000s, right? So it's the best aerospace contractor. Now, Tom DeLonge in his intro to Secret Machines doesn't say where he went either. But when you compare Tom DeLonge's experience to Admiral Tom Wilson's experience, it's essentially the same experience. They both went to an elite aerospace contractor, right? They both met tribunals, a gang of three, in a secured, compartmentalized information facility, right? Tom Wilson uses the term conference room in their secure vault. Tom DeLonge describes four layers of security, guns, electric, code entry systems, hallways with white noise. Again, they both met before, they both presented themselves before a council of three, right? And they both asked them about UFOs. Now, in Tom Wilson's case, he got an affirmative that yes, they did have a craft, not quote, not made by human hands, not from this world, end of quote. In Tom DeLonge's case, he was initially rebuffed. Then he asked to speak to the head of the council alone, and it just 5 minutes, and he sold him on the idea of, as the story goes, he sold them on the idea of creating an infotainment company, that he wanted to create an infotainment company that made them look good, and told the story in a way that is more accurate from their perspective. And that this infotainment company would essentially, mix fiction with true facts, and he needed advisors, right? And we're going to get into who those advisors were. But, you know, Tom DeLonge didn't say initially what aerospace contractor he visited. And Tom Wilson in the Wilson Davis notes doesn't say who it was either. However, something happened called the WikiLeaks, the Clinton email scandal, right? Where a bunch of emails from the Clinton campaign were hacked apparently and given to WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks put them on their website. And here is an email from Tom DeLonge uh, about a meetup online, right? A Google Meet that was supposed to happen between Tom DeLonge, John Podesta, okay, Barack Obama's chief advisor at this time, by the way, and the guy who was running the Hillary Clinton campaign. Because remember, at this time, January 2016, everyone thought Hillary Clinton was going to be the next president, right? It was obvious. And so there was going to be a group chat online between Tom DeLonge, John Podesta, General Neil McCaslin, okay, who was the head of the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base Foreign Technology Division, right? So Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, again, it's the place where the Roswell wreckage was taken. And foreign technology division sounds like a cute euphemism that might be used to hide something more extraordinary than just Chinese and Russian weapons, right? And you had General Kerry, you had Malia Fisher, who was a Clinton staff member in her campaign, and you had Bob Weiss, the new vice president of Lockheed Martin, right? So, that's very interesting. So, if you put these pieces together, it's obvious that Tom DeLonge went to Lockheed, right? So we know how this works. If you want to talk about UFOs to Lockheed, you have to go in their skiff and go behind the Council of Three, before the Council of Three, right? And so almost certainly, this is who Admiral Wilson was talking to as well. One thing I didn't put on this PowerPoint is that if you read the Wilson Davis notes, the Lockheed Martin, okay, the aerospace contractor Wilson spoke to told him that UFOs are real, but abductions are not real. What's interesting with that is that if you go back to my earlier episodes and you watch the presentation given by Dr. Jim Ryder, this man's predecessor, okay, the former vice president of Lockheed Martin before Bob Weiss, if you look at Jim Ryder's presentation on UFOs, he seems to hold this position, right, or a position very similar to it, because he says that the abduction experience might be real, but it's not physically real. It's something totally mental, right? And he gives an example of some study was done with an abductee. They put cameras and sensors in their room, they slept through the night. They said they got abducted. They had an experience, but their body didn't move. They never left the room. So he used that as evidence to suggest that the UFO abduction phenomenon, as real as it may be something happening totally on the mental plane and not a physical one. And so that seems to parallel the Wilson Davis notes when the Stereos aerospace contractor told him that UFOs are real, but abductions weren't. So that's an additional little point of evidence, right? That, here you have former Vice President of Lockheed Martin, Jim Ryder, and he seems to have the same opinion of alien abductions that this mysterious contractor, Admiral Wilson, visited did. And it's even more interesting given that Jim Ryder's talk was given in 2017, and the Wilson Davis notes leaked 2 years later. Again, Tom DeLonge wrote this book or published this book in 2016, 3 years before the Wilson Davis notes leaked, and he seems to have had uh, near identical experience that Admiral Tom Wilson did. And the most likely explanation, if you're going to use Occam's razor, is that they both went to Lockheed. Okay, and we know Tom DeLonge went to Lockheed. So, what came about of this mysterious meeting with Tom DeLonge? Well, what came about was To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences, right? This is the infotainment company that he started. Um, it's a miniaturized version of its former self today. Um, and we can go into why that is later, or you can just go online and find out. But this is what came about from those meetings, okay, with these, aerospace executives, okay, and these high-ranking, military men. What came out of that was To the Stars, right? And here's some of their products. I have all of these products. I mean, I've consumed all of these. I've paid for all of these, right? God's Man in War is a three-part nonfiction series talking about the history of God's man in war. And it goes into really interesting territory vis-a-vis the UFO phenomenon. And then you have, the Secret Machine series, parts one and two, which are, again, historical fictions. Then you had the Unidentified series on the History Channel, 2 seasons. Okay. As a relative newbie to the UFO thing, this series Unidentified was a big part of my education initially, right? And then you have the latest Monsters of California, right? Which is kind of like this guy humor, skater humor type of kind of monster movie about the UFO phenomenon. It's like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but with like three kind of stereotypical Southern California skater slash surfer guys. And I liked it. And what's interesting with Monsters of California and the Secret Machines books is that Tom DeLonge, if you know the AAWSAP stuff, like a lot of it is in there, especially Monsters of California. Now, who were his advisors? Well, we don't know all of them, but we do know that, hey, Chris Mellon was one of the founders of TTSA. Chris Mellon was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. Okay, so the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. Okay, at the Pentagon, right? Department of Defense. Lou Elizondo, we all know about him. He's a DIA special agent, and he ran the ATIP program. Then you have Steve Justice, right? The former head of Skunk Works, the former head of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, was a founding member of TTSA, as was Hal Puthoff. Yes, Hal Puthoff, the OSAP alumni of the group, was a founding member of TTSA. And don't forget, Hal Puthoff also ran the CIA's psychic spy program for 20 years. Okay. And then you have Jim Semivan, a CIA veteran, former high-ranking officer in the CIA. And so there you go, right? This is the daughter of Project Forum, or if Project Forum was the seed, this is the tree, right? And what kind of fruit did this tree bear out? Well, these two bombshell articles, right? These two articles are especially the New York Times. This is what changed the conversation forever with regards to the UFO phenomenon, right? Chris Mellon and Lou Elizondo, they had kind of smuggled these videos out of the Pentagon, right? The famous gimbal video, the Tic Tac video, and the FLIR video. Um, and yeah, that's the fruit that TTSA bore. Probably the most important fruit, right? Were these two huge articles back in 2017, which really changed the game forever, right? It changed the game forever. And because of those articles, we had 2002 congressional hearings on UFOs. I'm sorry, 2022 congressional hearings on UFOs, the 2023 congressional hearings on UFOs, and the 2024 congressional hearings on UFOs. And we're supposed to get more hearings this year. So well, at least we hope, right? Because there are a lot of crazy things happening in the world right now. But supposedly we're going to have more hearings this year with more whistleblowers and that sort of thing. So, that's what happened, right? You know, and it just goes to show how interesting it is that even though the OSAP program, died and, apparently survived in some form in its ATIP, but, having former OSAP and ATIP alumni, out in the white world, guys like Lozondo, guys like Hal Puthoff, it really shows that they did continue some of these efforts, whether officially or unofficially. Um, some of the efforts started by, uh, you know, the OSAP program, specifically in this case, Project Forum, which, at a face value bore no fruit. Like, as far as I know, these debates never happened, right? They never carried out Project Forum. But, you know, the alumni from OSAP did carry out very Project Forum like things, not the least of which being, the recruitment of this punk rock superstar, literally punk rock superstar, Tom DeLonge, one of the lead singer for one of the biggest bands in the world. at least when I was in college, it was the biggest band, or if not one, two biggest bands, right? Blink 182, right? They got him on board, and he's done a lot to educate the world. The History Channel show Unidentified, but most importantly, Elizondo and Mellon, getting these two huge stories to hit the mainstream press, really did change the game. And it seems like Project Forum, indirectly, right? Or Project Forum through her child called TTSA, really did come through in some sense, right? It really did continue. It makes you wonder how much of OSAP stuff is kind of continuing to happen. Look, remember, Lockheed Martin wanted to divest itself of this alien material, and it was blocked by the CIA, and makes you wonder if they're a little bit salty about that. Specifically, I'm not talking about the entire company, just the super high level insiders who know the secret, right? It just makes you wonder if they're a little miffed about that. That they don't want to be in the covered UFO material business anymore. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. They're spending more money on security and counterintelligence than they are on research. They're done. They've learned all they can know from it, and they don't want to do this anymore. And they got blocked. And so, hey guys, remember that thing we were gonna do? Project Forum? I have an idea. I know a guy, right? So to speak. The most Californian God ever made, right? And very big celebrity, who apparently was running in very important circles and achieved great things, in my opinion. So without further ado, I'm going to end the show. Always reminding you, consciousness isn't classified. Your awareness cannot be hidden inside some secret Lockheed Martin Class 3 facility in Chatsworth, California. And program of studying your own consciousness can never end because the government decided to stop funding it, right? You fund it with your own time and discipline. So just remember that your awareness, your consciousness is not classified. And with that, I bid you good night.